Hello everyone, in this video we're going to walk through a data analytics demo. For this demo you'll need a couple of things that I'll walk through here. In the Canvas we have, there's a link here for a website called openml.org. That's where you'll download a data file. And then also at the bottom of that page there's a script here just to create a table statement, and I'll show you how to use that as well during this demo. So the goal of this is to take a look at a simple data analytics example, and we're going to take a look at a data set that was from the Titanic accident. It's a well-documented data set, and it's openly available all over the place on the internet. And for our example, we're going to take a look at kind of a two-part question. Okay, and I have it highlighted here on our Canvas page. So out of all the people on the Titanic, did more males or females perish? And out of those, what was the percentage of that group, the group that perished the most, out of the total number of people on board? And this is a really good example of taking data that we may not be super familiar with and just taking a look at answering questions based on that data. And this is really a simple example of what data analysts do all the time. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to that website. And in the top right, there's several file formats that we can download. I'm going to grab the one that says CSV, and it'll download to my downloads folder right here. And if I just open this in a text editor, okay, I can take a look at the data. There's 1,309 records in here. There's a lot of columns, and we're only going to be interested in a couple of these. So, but what I want to do is I want to actually import this into my SQL. I'm going to jump over to MySQL, and we can do this pretty quickly. There's a couple of approaches to this, and in the previous data engineering module, we took a look at some examples of this, and just to make it a little easier, if we go back to that Canvas page, if you just copy this table statement, I'm just copying and pasting here, and I'm already in a database here. If you don't already have a database, you can create one or just put this wherever you like. And I'm just going to run this, and if I refresh, I'll see that I have a table here now with all of those columns. Okay, and you can take a look at that if you like. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm creating a work table like we talked about on the data engineering module. And very often when we're bringing data in from sources we're not super familiar with, you notice that, let me make this a little larger. You notice that I created all of the columns as a large varchar. And the reason I do that is I could try to go through, the web page actually shows some information about the types of data and all of that. A really simple approach is to just bring everything in as text. Kind of ignore the formatting and everything else, because I don't know the maximum data sizes and all those kind of things. And for these purposes, I can always manipulate these once I have them in my work table, right? So this is a really common way in which we do that, so we can get the data into a place in MySQL where we can actually start running queries. And so that's really what I'm interested in here, and that's why I have this table. Okay, I'm just going to delete that so you have some space to see. But I have the table created. It's here, called Titanic. And the next step is to actually just import the data from that file, right? And so what I'll do is I'll right-click on that table, and I'll use the Table Data Import Wizard, and I'll browse, and that file is in my Downloads folder. And I'll say Next, and I want to make sure that this says Use Existing Table. That's that Titanic table I just created. And I'll say Next, and these should line up just fine, but you might want to check to make sure that each of these, embarked, boat, body, etc., all line up well. And then just let it run. and finish. Okay. First thing to do is just make sure we have the data that we are expecting. Right. So we saw in the text file, in the CSV file, that there were 1,309 rows. If I look at the very bottom, I can see I've got 1,309. Right, and I can take a look at the data here. And as we talked about in data engineering, we could do some analysis on this right away, just sort of get an idea of what kind of data we're looking at. And so we're looking at, and we can compare this to some of the descriptions that are available on that website as well. But just really quickly, I can see, this is sort of the SAD column, how many people survived. And this is records of each individual person that was on the Titanic by name. Okay, their gender, their age, bunch of information about that. Class is, or P class, it's called, is the class of the ticket that they have, like first class, second class, third class, and then, as I said, survived. So we're going to take a look in this demo at the gender, and remember that's part of our question, right? First of all, which gender had the highest number of fatalities, and then of that, what's the percentage of the total? Well, the total we know now is 1,309, right? So that's a fact that we are familiar with. We'll keep this in mind, right? Okay. So the next thing is, if we go back, let's go back to that question, right? So we want to know, out of all of the people on the Titanic, did more males or females perish? So the first thing we can do is just take a look and see how many of each of the two genders there were on board to start with. Okay, so we're going to use an aggregate count and combine that with group by to get little details there. And oftentimes when we're doing data analysis, we're just capturing some preliminary numbers here, just so we can confirm as we progress that the numbers look right. As I said, we now know how many total passengers, so we'll want to keep that in mind, and we can sort of confirm as we continue, right? If I were to add 466 and 843, we would see that, okay, we have that correct. So the next thing is the survivability, right? This is a term that's used in sort of disaster data, the survivability rate or the percentage or whatever, right? Well, what we're going to use MySQL for is to prepare some data to then take over into Excel and use Excel to create a graphic based on this, right? This is an extremely common thing we do in data analytics. We use more than one tool to get the complete answer to a question. And we do this because different tools have different strengths, right? So I have the data now from the CSV file in a database table. Once it's here, I can use queries really easily, do what is often called data munging, and that means we have the raw data, but we need it in a format that we can use to answer the question that we have, right? And so what we want to know is kind of a summary. Rather than 1,300 records, I want to summarize those so that I can not only answer them more easily, but also present those answers to whomever it is that might be asking. Very, very often, the people asking the questions are non-technical, right? Executives or customers or whatever, and we want to present that information to them in a form that will be very clear. Okay. So we have a count of the gender, right? We know that. But what we don't know is, well, how many females survived and how many males survived and didn't, right? Let's expand on our query here. We're going to start out the same. We're also going to grab the column. If we take a look here real quick, you may not remember that there's a column called survived, right? And that's a binary. That's what we call a bit, right? 1 means yes, they survived. 0 means they did not. We're going to count based on the survival. And then from Titanic. And this time, when we group by, we're going to group by the gender and then by survived. And I'll sort it too, the same way. Okay. So this query is going to use, we're going to get 2 columns right now. We're going to get the gender and the survival, but we're also grouping by and summarizing by this aggregate count of the survival as well. So now I can see 127 females did not survive, and 682 males did not survive. So right here is really the first part of our answer, right, in a data form. Remember the question. The question says, out of all the people, did more males or females perish? Well, there we have our answer already with regards to that. Right? Now, the second half of that is really kind of a percentage. So we could do this. We could do another calculation in MySQL and get the percentage number. But again, we would have that just in a data form. And sure, we could report that to who's asking the question, but sometimes you want to see it visually. It's more impactful that way. And also, honestly, for the purposes of the demo, just to show you, one of the ways in which sometimes we'll take some summary data and move it into another tool, in this case, Excel, but this could be in Power BI or Tableau or any tool that can create visualizations, and just kind of demonstrate how we often do this, right? And one thing to keep in mind is that we have a lot of flexibility here in MySQL to create summary data in any form and any, sort it any way we want, any column. So this is a aggregate column, this number survived, right? So I could copy and paste this into Excel, but I'll show you real quick here. There's an export button right here, and I can give a file name, and that goes into my downloads folder, okay? And in that CSV, if I look at this in a, sorry, I went to the other screen, I just get, this is exactly the result of my query, right? So I have that as a CSV. The nice thing about CSV files is, if you notice, the icon is showing as the Excel symbol. On most systems, Excel is the default application for CSV files. So if I just double click this, it's going to open for me. So there's the result of my query, right? So a couple things I can do here. I can immediately graph this, right? And if you're not familiar with Excel, that's fine. Just kind of follow along with what I'm doing here. So I'm going to just show you a really quick, kind of simple way to get a graphic image of this. If I click once in what's called cell A2, right? Not the top one, but really the first data line row that we have, and hold down Shift and click on the last row, and then using Control, I can click and drag. Now I have selected 2 columns. Now these are not columns side by side, which is why I did the whole thing about shifting and Control. But once I have that, if I go to Insert, there's this thing that says Recommended Charts. Now there's a whole bunch of different types of charts in Excel. I'm just going to use this because it's really simple, okay? Just to kind of give you an idea, and you see down the side here, there's a whole bunch of different ways to look at this. I'll pick this one. That's fine. And you can change the way these look, whatever. So this is a really quick visualization, right? In the Canvas page, talks about visualization. Data analysis and visualization often goes together, right? So if I'm in my query result, I can look at this and I can see, okay, 682, that's a big number. That's the biggest number there. It's like I can get that idea of, okay, it was males. That's the first part of our question. But visually, it's often more impactful, right? So I can see on the second row, oh, wow, okay, that really stands out more visually than just looking at a bunch of numbers. And we're only looking at 4 rows of data. Imagine if our data has hundreds of rows. It would be very, very difficult to get a sense of what this really means, right? So the second half of the question, remember, let's go back again. The second half of the question is, what's the percentage, right, of those people on board? Well, one thing we don't know in the data, the result of that query, we don't have that total number of passengers or total number of people on board, which was 1309. We know that. I could type that in here, or this top right, I have this auto sum. If I click that and just press enter, it gives me, oh, there's that number that we are familiar with. We know that number from just looking at our queries. So we've confirmed, okay, we've got the right data, we've got the right number of records. So what we need now is a percentage for each of the 4 summarized rows that we have. And I'm going to use a little formula here. I'll explain this in a second. Let me just type this out. So that formula, it's probably hard to see, C2 divided by, and these dollar signs is $C, $6, is basically saying use that same cell for every one of these calculations. And I'm just copying and pasting these in. I'm going to change these. I'm highlighting those, and I'm clicking the percent sign up here, and that gives me the sort of rounded off percentage. I can do the same thing. I can use auto sum here just to make sure my calculation is right. Okay, so I know that I have the total number of records and my percentages are calculating correctly. So we can see again in the data, okay, 52%. That's a very high percentage compared to the others. But I can now also create another chart to expand on our visualization. Okay, so I click and drag here. I hold down Control, click and drag, and then click and drag again. So now I'm going to graph 3 of the columns, and I'm going to come over to recommended again. Now you'll see there's a little bit of a difference. This new chart has basically the same bars in this case, but the line is showing us our percentages. And again, you can play with the formatting. And then a little trick here in the top left, add chart element if we go to labels, and I'll put that probably there. Okay. So now when we look at these visualizations, if we show this to whomever it is that's asking the questions, right? Very often they don't understand queries and data. If this data summarization was much larger, it'd be really challenging to convince someone of the correct number based on rows and rows and rows of data versus a visualization. So back in Canvas, when we talked about data analytics and visualizations, those two tend to go hand in hand in the industry a great deal, right? And so the process that we just walked through of getting the data, right? Now, acquiring the data can come from many sources, right? It might be coming from the company. It might come from, website data. It could come from the database of a company. You might have to combine data from several sources together into one data set, and then, come up with ways to use tools, right? In this case, we used MySQL and we used Excel to come up with the answer to this question, right? So now we have the combined answer. We know that it's males, more males perished, and we know of the total number of people on that ship, what the percentage of that was, of those that perished in that particular gender, right? So a bit of a contrived question, but just to give you an idea of the types of approaches that data analysts use. And this is a very simplistic example. In business, we tend to analyze data in many different ways to answer many different kinds of questions, just like we did all through the semester when we wanted to write a query. Most of the time, what we were trying to answer, the question being asked was asked, just in human terms. How many of these products did we sell in, the first quarter, right? There's no technical detail there. It's up to us as, the SQL programmers, the data analysts or whatever, to convert those questions into the techniques to get the answers. And when we get to this stage, after the database exists, after it's been populated with data like you've been doing all semester, once data engineering has gotten the data into the format that the database can handle, then analyzing that data and using that data for real world questions and challenges, trying to solve problems, any of those kind of things, that's where data analysis comes in. And visualization is just one of the tools that we use often to help everyone understand, what it is that what answers we're finding, right? And, if there's problems in this data, sometimes you see those problems using visualization as well. If there's anomalies in the data or there's mistakes or whatever, back here, I was sort of confirming my numbers by saying, oh yeah, I'm matching up what I know about this. And that's sort of a technique that we use a great deal. Also is we sort of keep these rolling counts and rolling numbers to make sure that we're kind of keeping on track. And if something all of a sudden, like if this suddenly said, 1303, I would be wondering, okay, what happened? I lost 6 records somewhere along the way, right? And so ultimately, you end up with some visualizations, and on the Canvas page are some examples of some websites here that show, just lots and lots of examples of visualizations, much more advanced than what we just did, of course, but these are all visualizations that came from data, okay? And this is the kind of stuff that a lot of people really get interested in if you're interested not only in technology and data, but also somewhat artistic as well, right? These are pretty good looking. They present really well, whether this is at a conference or whatever. And so, this is a good area to think about and to consider with regards to, career paths and things like that if you're interested in data. So this has been just a really simple demo of data analytics, tiny bit of visualization, just to kind of give you an idea. And as I mentioned here in the Canvas page, we also use lots of other tools. Excel and MySQL are not the only ones. There's lots of them out there. We use different programming languages for different reasons. And so there's a whole field in analysis, basically, and a quite honestly lucrative career path too. So it's something to be, to look at if you're interested in this kind of thing. As always, if you have any questions, let me know, and thanks for listening.